My name's Russell Holden and I'm a member of the Horseless Carriage Club down here in Australia, and we've looked at several of our vehicles, and today we're going to look at what is the family's favourite car. It's a 1902 Thomas, manufactured by E.R. Thomas and Co. from Buffalo, New York, who were famous for winning the 1908 New York to Paris race in a Thomas Flyer. This is the oldest surviving example of E.R. Thomas manufacturing, and as I said, it's the family's favourite car. We've done thousands and thousands of miles in it, 7 or 8 national rallies and numerous local rallies, so we drive the car a lot. To give you some history of E.R. Thomas, Irwin Ross Thomas was a railway man, very much so involved in the US and the Canadian railways, and he was a bit of an inventor and a tinkerer. So in the late 1890s he decided to go into the manufacturing of motors. So a proprietary motor could be sold to anybody for boats, for automobiles, for motorbikes. In 1900 he was approached to back an organisation to build automobiles, and the deal was that he would be the financial backer and the major shareholder, but have nothing to do with running of the companies, but of course they would buy Thomas Motors. That company was called the Buffalo Automotive Company, and in 1901 they released a very small 4 horsepower car, and in 1902 they announced what they called the Buffalo Senior and the Buffalo Junior, the Junior being an extension of the 4 horsepower and the Senior being a 6 horsepower car, both using the Thomas Motors. By July 1902 the company wasn't going anywhere, and E.R. Thomas decided to step in and take control of the organisation, and in September of that year he announced that a reorganisation of the company to E.R. Thomas Motor Company, and that they would release a new model called a Model 17, which would have an 8 horsepower motor. And as I said earlier, this is the oldest surviving example of those very first E.R. Thomas vehicles. There is one other 1902 Thomas, and that belongs to a friend of mine in Connecticut. So now I'll show you a bit more about the car. The frame is very typical of the period. It is angle iron, it is welded together, and it doesn't have a lot of cross-member structure to it, but nevertheless work for the day. The motor is a single-cylinder 8 horsepower motor. It is a Model 93 Thomas. The Buffalo ran a Model 90 Thomas motor. This is a Model 93, and one assumes that means that the Thomas Manufacturing Company had built 93 motors before this design. This is the crank shaft cover. This is the crankshaft, which runs all the way through and runs the water pump here, runs through to the flywheel and continues on, and the gearbox is all mounted on the one shaft. This is a 2-speed planetary gearbox. This is first speed. This down here is reverse. And if we come over here, this is the clutch dog, and it sits on these 4 fingers, and unusually for 1902 this is a 4-finger cone clutch. So these are leather pads, they lock onto the cone there, and when that's locked in gear it is 1-to-1 with the motor. So if the motor's doing 800 revs, the gearbox is doing 800 revs. It's single chain drive to the differential down here, and it's also single brake, which is on the differential, and believe it or not, even though it seems to get a lot of oil and grease, it actually works particularly well for a single brake. So the carburetor is mounted here on a manifold into what would commonly be called an F-head, because this is the exhaust valve at the bottom and this is the inlet valve at the top. But unlike most F-heads, this inlet valve is actually mounted in the inlet from the factory, and so it's removable, and there's a push rod that comes all the way from the bottom of the cam gear here up to run the inlet, and this runs the exhaust there. So as you can see, this gear is twice as big as this gear, so that everything turns as it goes over on the 4 cycles being inlet, compression, exhaust, and then suction for inlet again. So these are oil lines. I was very lucky to find the correct oiler at Hershey one year, manufactured by the Sherwood Manufacturing Company of Buffalo, New York, who also manufactured the original carburetor for this car. Likewise, I was very lucky to find the original light, again at Hershey one year. So we'll show you that when the body's put on later on. Steering is here. Uniquely, this has a tilt steering wheel from factory. That just aided getting in and out of the car. To engage first gear, you come up, and then to engage top, you go down. Reverse is on this pedal, and this is obviously the brake pedal. So advance and retard, accelerator, advance and retard is there, accelerator is there. I've put this little removable pedal on because it makes it easier to drive. As I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of miles in this car. We will do another national rally in Victoria in April in this car. Having the ability to put your foot on the accelerator rather than having to hold the accelerator just makes it a lot more comfortable to do, 100 miles in a day in the car. So that's about the wares of it mechanically. It rides on full elliptic springs, all round, all 4 springs are full elliptic. The Model 18 Thomas that was released in January of 1903 actually ran on half elliptic springs. So this was the only year they ran the full elliptic springs. It's got 28 by 3 inch artillery wheels, and is capable of close to 40 mile an hour. It's very comfortable sitting on 30 mile an hour all day, every day. It will accelerate to 35 if you need to overtake, and I don't mind telling you, when you do that, you usually catch a few people by surprise. But that's the layout of the vehicle, and I'll show you later on as we put the body on and different bits and pieces, and then we'll start it and let you hear it running.